Hola, hola. This is your boy, Eternal Sadist. And today I'm going to talk about entitlements, economics and why immigration is so important to your government for the most part. This is what I'm going to talk about today. Why immigration is so important to your economy and your economic growth, quote unquote, your economic growth. I'm literally throwing up air quotes right now, so follow me if you can. Typically, typically the reason why immigration is so important, or let me rephrase that for you so you can understand it better. The reason why diversity is so important to your government is for two reasons. One, you're below your your governments are usually below population replacement rates for the most part, and two, your government's doing a very very bad thing at the same damn time. That's typically how this works because I've talked about this in several servers that I've been in for the most part, and it blew everybody's mind how it actually works. Here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to immigration and when it comes to reform. The problem with the immigration thing and the reform thing, I mean, the immigration for the most part. I'm sorry. The problem with the whole entire thing is understanding that the fact that your country is under replacement rate for the most part. Your government relies on your government relies on the population replacement rate to be at a proper level. That's typically how that works. The problem with that is when you run into problems where you know when you run into problems where your government spends too much money. And what I mean by that is typically your government when you see a large flux of immigrants come into your country, it's because your government pretty much spun your money. And what I mean by your money, I mean meaning most if not all first world countries who accept immigrants have something referred that they were referred to as a social security for like the people who worked and paid into it, and they were basically collected at the end towards the end of their lives from their government because they basically paid into it. It's a bank that all the government all the, I don't know what they call it in various countries, but it's basically Social Security when it comes to the United States. I don't know what they call it in Canada or UK or any other of the first world countries, but typically that's what it's called in the United States. It's basically something that you pay into. So when you get old and you start going off into your merry way and you're later in your years, you basically retire from the workforce, and the government pays back all the stuff that you paid in for the most part. That's typically how that works. And if you've ever noticed, the government always complains about the money running out or somehow the money, something wrong with the money, basically. What that actually means is your government's actually spending that money on shit they have no business spending that money on. That's typically what that means. It doesn't mean anything else besides the fact that your government's spending the money on bullshit for the most part. What happens with that is when your government spends too much of that money, you hear various people on each side talking about two different things, basically. You'll hear the leftists talk about diversity's king, diversity's important, diversity forever for the most part. You'll hear the people on the right say something to the extent of um, we got to cut entitlement spending, quote unquote. That's typically how that comes out. What that actually means from the right is they need to cut the people from spending the fucking money that's coming out of Social Security for the most part. That's typically what that means. When they start talking about Social Security and shit like that, they basically mean when they say we got to cut entitlement spending when it comes when as far as like Social Security is concerned. Typically, what that means is the right's basically saying we ain't going to admit it, but we fucking up. We're not going to say what side is fucking up. We keep on overspending your money, so therefore we need to cut that, so therefore we can maintain everybody's retirement into the future. Typically, is what that means. That's the long-winded version of it. Cut entitlement spending, which means cut whoever the hell's spending it in the government, cut them off from spending it so you can actually go, so it can actually continue and grow and actually have money in the fucking bank for the most part. That way we won't have to bring immigrants into the country to replace the fact that your government keeps taking your money out of the bank for the most part. That's typically what it means from the right. What it means from the left, how the left views it is diversity is key. Diversity is important. Diversity is strength. That's pretty much what that means from the left. Basically, we keep spending your shit, so we're going to bring in more immigrants so we can replace, so we can have them work in the workforce, so we can replace your shit because we keep spending your shit. You see what I'm saying? You see how that works? That's pretty much the wording in a nutshell. So what happens with that is you'll get two people from each side basically saying two different things for the most part. You got one side basically spinning it to the point to make it sound like they're trying to take that shit away from you. Like the left usually says, well, the Republicans are talking about, cutting, entitlement spending and Social Security and this, that, and the other. No, they're not talking about actually cutting Social Security. They're talking about cutting off certain government entities from spending money from the Social Security thing that has nothing to do with the people who actually really needs it. That's pretty much what that means. Whereas the left will say, instead of actually stop spending the money, they'll say, we need more immigrants. Diversity is king. Diversity this. Diversity forever. Diversity is strength. That's pretty much their chant and their mantra when it comes to it. The sad part about that is, yes, diversity is strength if you're going to keep on playing off their model, diversity is strength. If you keep on taking money out of there, you're going to need more immigrants to replace the fucking money that's being taken out of the fucking account. It'd be no different if you're a man, you're married, and you make, let's just say, you make $100,000 a month, we'll say, to basically deal with your house. We'll say you have 5 kids. We'll say you have a very high maintenance wife. And typically, this is basically the government. You as a person putting the money, working to put the money into the account is you as an old young man putting money into the account so you can actually get your Social Security later. So basically, you working to get $100,000 a month is and it going straight direct deposit into your account is you working so you can pay for your Social Security. We'll say that your wife and your children and all the activities that they need to do and all the expensive stuff that your wife claims you need that you really don't need is the government finding a way to take the money out of the fucking account. Best way I can describe it to you. So you make $100,000 a month. You come home every month. You're trying to figure out why you don't get $100,000 in a bank account, or you don't get at least $1,000 in a bank account. Typically, what happens with that? The best way to say it is 90-something% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Here's why. The person that you're living with keeps spending the shit faster you can get the shit, or spending the shit just as fast as you can get the shit for the most part. We'll say that for the most part. So that's typically what's happening with your government. Therefore, because we're spending the shit and we don't want to admit that we're spending your shit, we got to bring in more immigrants to basically replace the money that's in that Social Security bank. That shouldn't be touched, that technically should be kept collecting interest, and there should never be a problem with it on why we need immigrants to actually replace it. Basically is how it works. Here's how it works. Basically, your government brings in immigrants. The immigrants start working in a workforce. They basically their money that they work in the workforce basically replaces the money that's in Social Security. The sad part about that, your government knows that you're below birth replacement rates, so therefore they need immigrants from countries. If you ever notice, the immigrants they always get come from countries where they can have anywhere between 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kids, basically. So they basically bring those people over, hoping that they'll repopulate at that high rate. Unfortunately, after a while, those immigrants basically slow down too and catch up to about the normal American birth population rate. So when that happens, they got to go get more immigrants to replace that. Then it slows down again. They got to go get more immigrants to replace that. And they keep and as they're doing this, they're taking money out of the Social Security fund. that shouldn't be touched in the first damn place unless you're paying out somebody who worked all their life to earn it for the most part. That's typically how that works. Unfortunately, another good example of the way to think of this way is think of Social Security as a Ponzi scheme. I mean, think of the whole entire thing with the immigrants and Social Security as a big ass Ponzi scheme. Basically, your government has this bank account with your money in it, and they're going to pay you when you turn 60, 50, 70, whatever the hell your age is in any of your countries for the most part. Okay, cool. Unfortunately, your government keeps spending your fucking money that don't belong to them, and they keep on either putting it in their pocket, putting it in somebody else's pocket, or greasing somebody else's palms. That's typically how that works. Therefore, now that they spent all this money, they got to replace this money. So now they got to bring in more immigrants. More immigrants means more money for them to spend. Now they spend the money. They spend too much money. Now they got to bring in more immigrants. They got the money back now. Now they spend too much money. Now they got to bring in more immigrants. This is why immigration is so important to your fucking government on a regular basis. That's all they do is basically spend the money, spend too much, and they bring in more immigrants. It's basically no different than a husband who's bringing home $100,000 a month, and his wife spends it on Lord knows what, and have nothing to show for it. Basically, that's typically how that works. So she eggs you and says that you need to work more hours because we got these expenses that we need. Basically, that basically meaning you need to work more hours so we can replace this account, meaning your government saying we need more immigrants for the most part is the best equivalent I can actually bring up for you. That's the best analogy I can bring up for you. Be no different than your wife saying we need more money, so we need you to go, and I need you to go work some more hours so we can replace this money so we can do more things with our money. When in fact, if she wasn't spending all this money, you wouldn't have this problem and you wouldn't have to work all these freaking hours to actually make this money back. Pretty much that's what it is when it comes to immigration. If they didn't spend your money, they wouldn't have to bring in immigrants to actually replace the money that they keep on spending. That's typically how that works. And the sad part about that just doesn't go on in the U.S. That goes on in Great Britain. That goes on in Canada. That goes on in a lot of the other European countries. And that goes on throughout Scandinavian countries also as well. If you see a large flux of immigrants and you're wondering why they keep coming in, it's time to look at your government on why they're coming in. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some Scandinavian countries who limit their immigration, but there are some that go above and beyond on their immigration, basically. There are a couple of them that go above and beyond on their immigration, just let anybody and everybody in so they can replace the race. That means they're basically stealing from you somewhere in that chain of command when it comes to your money, when it comes to your retirement. They're robbing you from somewhere. So, typically when you hear people you hear hot button issues like, Social Security or free Medicare, or the Medicare bank is running out of money, or you hear shit like that. Basically, depending on where you are in the world, your government is robbing you from those portions for the most part to pay something else, or to basically pocket the money, or basically give it the money, put the money in somebody else's pocket. So if you ever hear your government talking in the Scandinavian countries where you have healthcare for all, or universal health, whatever that you call it in your country, if your government or UK or anywhere else in the world, if you hear them ever talk about the bank for the healthcare is running out, that means they robbed the bank. Now they're bringing in more immigrants so they can replenish the bank. And you'll notice every so often they'll talk about the bank for healthcare, or they'll talk about the bank for retirement. Conveniently always comes up during an election year as they're bringing in immigrants. If you've ever noticed that, it's just a vicious cycle for the most part, because they can't get enough and not spend. They can't get enough of spending the money that don't belong to them for the most part, and that's typically how that works. And it's sad, but that's pretty much the nature of the beast when it comes to your government and when it comes to immigration. I'm not saying immigration is bad, but at the end of the day, if the government stopped spending the money, they wouldn't have to tout diversity is strength, or diversity is uniting the country, or diversity is strong, or diversity, whatever chant they come up with. They would never have to tout that if they stopped taking the money out of your Social Security, or out of your your universal health care bank. If they didn't do that, they wouldn't need all these people, basically, is what I mean. And the sad part about that is if you've ever watched it, you'll notice there's a large flux of immigrants depending on what time of year it is, depending on a certain district needing a certain person to retain their seat or a certain person voted out of their seat, there end up being like a large flux of immigrants that come in with that whole entire thing. If you've ever noticed, like let it be like a senator or let it be a governor, let it be a whatever they call it in the UK, whoever's in charge of that district, or let it be the UK, let it be the Scandinavian countries, let it be the any European country. If you've ever noticed, when somebody wants a seat very, very badly, you'll notice a large flux of immigrants that come in, so they can vote for that person, so they can get that seat, basically. And typically, you got to watch that when immigrants come in, because usually it's about time. It's about running into an election year, or it is pretty much an election year. If in somehow, some way, rush delivery, they all got voting rights conveniently, which is pretty shocking that they all got voting rights. Even if it's like even if it's like the next month to vote, somehow, some way, all these immigrants conveniently got voting rights or got the chance right to vote, basically, without it. Like they basically got to expressway. They got express lane to vote for the most part when they come into your country. That's typically how that works. And usually, I've noticed a lot of the times when immigrants first come here, it usually benefits the Democratic Party. After time, when a lot of the immigrants here stay, they tend to switch to the Republican Party. Typically, is how it works. And what I mean by that is a lot of Latinos, when they first come here, they'll vote Democrat because that's who bought them here. There's a reason why they're here. They don't really know why they're here. They just think they got a great chance and a great opportunity. Meanwhile, they're just here to replace the bank. The sad part about that, if you know anything about Latinos, is we tend to be traditionally conservative. So generally, we'll start off in your country as left-leaning people, and somewhere in our transition, we'll transition over to right-leaning. For the most part, is typically how that works, because that's typically where Latins tend to lean to. They tend to lean more towards the right than they do the left because we tend to be more conservative than we tend to be liberal, if you know what I mean. Um, that's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is, as we get to know what's going on in the different candidates, we tend to reform or conform back to our natural state of conservative for the most part. Don't get me wrong, there are some that come here and go straight to conservative side and say, fuck this liberal shit, I'm going to be a conservative. But there are some that start off liberal and they transition over to conservative for the most part. Because that's pretty much the Democrats are relying on the flux of immigrants to actually vote Democrat for the most part. Because typically, usually, that's who bought them here in the first damn place. So the people who bought them here, or the people who 9 times out of 10 are going to get the vote. It's typically how it works. This is why Democrats are always pandering to minorities for the most part, or always giving incentives to minorities, especially immigrant minorities. Democrats always give incentives to minorities. Like a good example of that a long time ago, and a lot of people were upset with these people, was the Syrian refugees that we took in. Now, I commend the Syrian refugee for saying this. She said, or two of them said, and I quote, I don't want this stuff for free. I want to work and participate to society. I don't want this stuff for free. What's up, Free Agent Pepe? I don't want this stuff for free. I want to work and participate in society for the most part. Now, white people took that as, what do you mean you don't want free stuff? Well, you were just railing that you don't want people having free stuff on your dime. And the minute somebody actually says that from another country, that they don't want to have this stuff for free, nor do they want to stay for free, they want to be able to work and participate in the economy. Now you want to get mad at this person. And typically, the people who get mad at them are people on the left. Like all the white people on the left tend to get mad at these people. Black people will go, well, hey, they want to participate. They want to participate. No shame in my game. That's typically how black people look at it on the left. White people on the left get upset because they feel as though that you should accept this free shit, despite the fact that a week ago they were upset that all these free programs and all this free shit that they're handing away to other countries. Now they want to be upset because you don't want to receive their free shit for the most part. You see how that works? That's typically how the left works. But the sad part about that is those refugees actually prove the point that they don't want this free shit, because at the end of the day, if you're taking free shit and free all these free money and the free living expenses and the free travel expenses and the free money that they give you to live, you're basically indebted to them to vote for them. That's typically how the Democratic Party works. You're indebted to them to vote for them. It is what it is. Whether you like it or not, you're indebted to them to vote for them. It is what it is. But the sad part about that is a lot of the people tend to not like that idea of being indebted to people that they need to be indebted to, or they don't want to be indebted to people. Basically, they want to work for their own because they come from countries where they want to work for their stuff. What's up, Red Pill? I mean, MGTOW on the win. Yeah, and that's typically true when it comes to it. Latinos tend to not be pro LGBTQ community, nor does black people for the most part, for that matter. Because if you know anything about black people like preserving what little dignity that they do have left for the most part. They tend to be, black people on a whole, for the most part, tend to be traditional, very trad-conny for the most part. Don't get me wrong, there are some outliers when it comes to black people, but black people nature is basically to be very conservative. Now, there are them ratchet ass motherfuckers that do stupid shit, but on the whole, black people tend to be more conservative than their Democratic counterparts for the most part. So it's just stuff like that. Yeah, what's up, MGTOW on the win? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, Democrats want slaves for the most part to be beholden to them so they can actually vote for them. And typically, when that happens, either a Democrat's trying to keep their seat, or a Democrat's trying to take a seat. So when you see a large flux of immigrants coming into your country, look at where they're going to. Look at the district that they're going to be living in. Look at the state or country or county or district, and the voting district in which they're moving into. Because typically, that's where the Democrats are either fighting for their seat, or whatever your version of the liberals is in your country, are either fighting for their seat or trying to maintain their seat for the most part. And that's typically how that works. Basically, at the end of the day, immigration is nothing more than to hide your government spending your Social Security and or your healthcare for all, or whatever you call it, universal healthcare bank, basically. So typically what happens in all these countries, depending on where you are, let it be America, let it be Europe, let it be England, let it be Scandinavia, let it be Canada, let it be Australia, typically what happens is your government spending your money, let it be your universal healthcare bank money or your retirement money, basically, that's owed to you when you retire. So what happens with that is your government overspends, so they need to bring in immigrants. The immigrants start working, and they pretty much start filling in the milieu. And the sad part about that is 9 times out of 10, if they're bringing in immigrants, they're bringing in for two reasons. One, birth replacement rates are low as hell. And two, they keep spending money out of one of those two banks, or both of those banks for the most part, depending on what country you're in. Let it be the UK, let it be New Zealand, let it be Australia, let it be Canada, let it be America. Well, America doesn't have universal health care, so basically it's your Social Security that's being spun. Whereas in these other countries, they do have universal health care, but they also have a nice retirement fund that gets spun by their government, so they need these immigrants so they can replace that fund for the most part. So basically, the whole entire diversity is strength mantra that the liberals in your country pretty much preach is nothing more than a big ass Ponzi scheme. Basically, how it works is just like a Ponzi scheme. We spend we spend this money, we gotta get more immigrants. We overspend the money, get more immigrants. Get some more immigrants, get some more immigrants. Immigrants replace the money. We spend the money again, get some more immigrants, get some more immigrants, get some more immigrants, get some more immigrants, spend the money again, get some more immigrants, get some more immigrants, get some more immigrants. And it's basically like a shell game, basically. They keep on replacing the money with new immigrants for the most part. And that's typically how it works. And like Free Agent Pepe said, they're basically taking money from their retirement funds for the most part in their country. In the UK, I've heard it come up for their universal healthcare bank and their retirement come up in the news several times, basically over the last few years. For the most part, they're talking about like their retirement one year, and 4 years later, they're talking about our universal healthcare. The bank is slowly dwindling. Well, this is what's happening. They're stealing your money out of your banks. That's typically how that works. The banks are being depleted because they keep stealing the money. And like I said at the beginning of the video, during an election year, you'll hear two chants from two different parties, basically. The liberal side of things will say, diversity is strength. Yay. Diversity is good. Diversity is good. Immigration is great. Diversity is strength. That's their mantra. On the left, they'll talk about cutting entitlement spending. And I explain what that actually means. What it actually means when it comes to cutting entitlement spending is stopping the motherfuckers in the government from spending your shit. That's what entitlement spending means when it comes from the Conservative Party. Stopping the government from spending your shit. That's pretty much what it is. That's pretty much what it is. And the leftist side would be like, will say immigration is strength, immigration is great, and all this other great stuff. What that actually means is we spend too much money, so we need some of these immigrants to replace this money. This is why immigration is great, and diversity is strength, and diversity is so great. Because we spend your money, and now we got to replace it, and we don't want to admit that we just spent your money, and we got to replace it because. That's pretty much how that works. And the sad part about that is a lot of people fall for that hook, line, and sinker because the left will say, well, the right's talking about taking away your Social Security. The right's talking about cutting various government entities and various government employees from stealing money from your account, basically. That's pretty much what that whole entire reform is when it comes to entitlement spending or cutting entitlement spending. They're trying to cut the government, the various government employees from taking money from it. That's pretty much what it is. And it's sad, but it's so true. But people get so caught up in the wording and how it is. That's pretty much how you end up. Yeah, and that's true. Their lobbyists love cheap labor for the most part. But at the end of the day, on a trade-off for conservatives for cheap labor, they want to stop the left from, the left and other entities from taking money out of that account that doesn't need money taken out of that you didn't pay into for the most part. That's typically how that works. They basically want to stop the left, but then the trade-off is we're going to cut this so they can't spend it, but we'll allow these immigrants in, but we're going to cut this so you can't spend it because this is getting ridiculous on all these people that you're just bringing into the country. That's typically how they think for the most part on the conservative side of things. That's pretty much how they think on the conservative side of things. And the sad part about it is a lot of people get bamboozled or tricked or get disillusioned on the whole entire thing with the immigration. Then you have people that I don't understand why we got all these immigrants in our country. Well, here's why. Your government keeps spending your shit. So don't be mad at the immigrants coming in. Be mad at your government for spending your shit. Immigrants have nothing to do with this besides they're here to replace the shit that your government keeps spending. That's typically how that works. The more you see immigrants, the more your government is spending your fucking shit. That's the nature of the fucking beast. So you can't be mad at the immigrants for wanting to get a chance to come to a country to do better with yourselves, only to be played into the system as slaves just like you, to pay back all the shit that your mom and dad and your dad's dad and your dad's dad's dad all worked for to put into the bank so they can all retire happy, somewhat comfortable, and somewhat decently comfortable for the most part. But unfortunately, they can't do that if the government keeps taking money out of the bank and they don't bring in immigrants to replace the money. That's typically how that works. It's a big ass shell game with immigrants and your money. That's basically how you look at it. Like I said, another good analogy I used earlier in this live stream is think of it like this: you're a man, you're in a single household, you're in a single income household for the most part. We'll say you have 5 kids. You will say you have a lovely wife that likes spending money. This is the analogy I'm going to use. You have a lovely wife that likes spending money, like it's going out of style. You make $100,000 a month, we'll say. Every time you look at your account, you can't figure out where all that 100,000 went to. Somehow, some way, your wife's done spun 100,000 in 1 month. Now she turns to you and says, "You need to work more hours so we can replace this money." That's typically how that works. You need to work more hours so we can replace this money. So what do? As that single man income household, you basically go into work and you work, let's just say for 1 week you work 80 hours. Now you're working 90 to 100 hours now to replace that money so you're going to feed the insatiable appetite of your household for the most part that's overspending your fucking money. Which leads me to another analogy, which brings me to the 90% of people who literally live paycheck to paycheck because they don't have any savings for the most part. Look at it like that. You're that family who makes $100,000 a month. Your wife likes spending money. You got 5 kids, and money's just being spun, and you don't know where it's going. You have nothing to show for it as a guy. You come home every month, and you might want to go out to the bar and hang out with friends, but there's no money in your account because your wife done spent it all on Lord knows what. For what? You have no clue what activities your children are in, because 9 times out of 10, they're probably not really attending those activities all that often, but you're paying for those activities on a regular basis for the most part. Think of it like that. That's pretty much what's happening to your money, your Social Security, when your government spends your money and they talk about bringing in immigrants. Basically, what I mean is you're the retiree. Basically, you work to get the money so you can retire. Your wife spends all the money on frivolous shit. Then she turns around and tells you that you gotta work more hours. Analogy meaning we need more immigrants. So your wife tells you gotta work more hours. Your 80 hours aren't enough. Now you gotta work 90 to 100 hours now so we could actually get out of the hole that you'll never get out of for the most part, because your wife keeps spending your money. The more money you make, the more money she spends. The more shit she sees that now she can afford to spend more money on other shit. That's typically how that works. So now you got to go into work and work 90 to 100 hours a week now to basically get extra money in the household. Meaning, not only are you working for your retirement, now you're working like you're an immigrant for the most part. Now you are the immigrant working these extra hours to replace the money that your wife keeps spending. So now, not only are you the retiree that's trying to retire and trying to live comfortable and put savings aside, you're now an immigrant and the retiree at the same damn time, replacing the money that your wife, aka the government, keeps spending. You see how that works? Everybody understand that? Do I need to backtrack that so anybody lost on that one? Everybody understand that analogy for the most part? In other words, the woman you're married to is the government. Your children are other special interest groups or lobbies groups for the most part. So we'll call your children lobbyists. You're pretty much lobbying to the government so they can get more money out of this deal for the most part. So you're the worker who is trying to save for his future and retire comfortably. You have no savings because your wife keeps spending it, aka the government keeps spending it. So she tells you that you need to work 90 to 100 hours a week now so we can get out of the hole. Now you're not only are you the guy trying to save up money and save for his retirement, now you become the immigrant now. So now you're the immigrant and you're the guy, the lovely American who's trying to save up and live the American dream now. So basically that's how that works. You're extra Your extra hours that you're going to be working, those extra 10 or 20 hours you're going to be working a week, are basically an immigrant for the most part, coming in to replace that money that your wife, aka the government, keeps spending. So nonetheless, you're nothing more than a slave to your fucking system. That's typically how that works. That's always how that works. And that's pretty much all of how that's pretty much how it always be until your government gets wise and stops spending shit and stops bringing in immigrants to replace shit. And maybe if they stop bringing in immigrants, just maybe more people in America will have children and the population rate would go up. Maybe the repopulation rate would go back up. Maybe, just maybe, just maybe. That's typically how you got to look at it, and that's pretty much your economy in a nutshell. That's pretty much what's happening with your money in a nutshell. Let it be your universal health care bank. Let it be your retirement bank or your social security bank, whatever you call it in your country. Let it be universal health care, retirement, or social security. That's pretty much what's happening with your stuff because the government keeps taking your shit and allocating it towards shit that they have no business allocating it towards. That's pretty much what it is. Do I need to repeat that for anybody? Everybody caught up to that? Everybody good? What's up, Yam? Well, the sad part about that, I don't I don't think it was a part of the plan for it to be so soon. I think they were waiting for that to happen down the road, but unfortunately because it happened, it kind of sort of sped it up a bit for the most part. And it kind of sort of put them in dire straits when it happened. I don't think they were expecting the birth rates to collapse the way they did. This is why you see them bringing in immigrants by the hundred thousands for the most part, because that's not something. If you got to bring in immigrants by the hundred thousands, that's not something you was expecting to happen. That wasn't a part of your plan, which means it collapsed well before the time you had it planned to actually collapse for the most part. It's typically what I think of that for the most part. So I think that was a part of the plan, but I think the plan kind of sort of accelerated to the point where they couldn't keep up. So therefore now we got to bring in Syrian refugees. Now we got to bring in Somali refugees. Now we got to bring in African refugees. Now we got to bring in Latinos. Now we got to bring in whoever else throughout the world who has a decent amount of kids per family for the most part. We got to bring them into the country. And that's typically the people who they let into the country at a higher rate for the most part. Like I said, yeah, it's a part of the plan. Yeah, it's a part of the plan, but unfortunately, that plan was accelerated by the fact that a lot of the people in your country aren't having children. So now your government is panicking. Now they got to replace the fact that they're stealing your money, and the plan went too good and went faster than they expected it to go for the most part. That's typically how that works. But I agree with you 100%. It is a part of the plan. Unfortunately, the plan went a little too good, went a lot faster and better than they expected it to for the most part. They had a time frame where they wanted it to go. Unfortunately, it went faster than that time frame, unfortunately. So now they need immigrants to replace that shit. I think, to be honest with you, I think that if we were at no, we'll just say if we weren't below birth replacement rate and we were even with birth replacement rate, there would be less immigrants for the most part, is what I'm saying. Free agent Pepe. But I agree with you 100%. But I think the government didn't count on a lot of people not having children, unfortunately. That's the problem that they ran into. Because at the end of the day, even if you want to deplete the population, you still got to have enough people so you can keep on taking money from those banks for the most part. You got to have people to replace that. So, like I said, I think if we'd have stayed even in all our countries, we wouldn't need as many immigrants by the boatloads or by the clip for the most part. Because at the end of the day, it's very odd that you're bringing in pretty much something the size of a immigrants about that pretty much rival the size of like a medium town in America for the most part. Let's just say that will rival the size of Rhode Island or something like that. Or I mean the population of Rhode Island. You're bringing in immigrants at that rate for the most part. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, but they weren't expecting it to be at an all-time low this fast. I believe they were expecting it to be at an all-time low maybe 5 years from now or 7 years from now, basically, if you know what I mean. To be at an all-time low well before that is probably bad for their liking because now they're in panic mode and now they got to replace the shit that they keep on stealing for the most part. That's typically how that works. But I agree with you 100%. It is at an all-time low. They weren't expecting it to be at an all-time low this early in the game. I think they were expecting it in the next 5 years. Well, in 5 years or 7 years for the most part to be at an all-time low, not like in the early 2000s, basically. Yeah, men have woken up a bit because you'll hear people saying damn immigrants and shit like that for the most part. So basically, this is why I'm making that video for all the people who don't know. This is why we're pulling in all these immigrants. A lot of men woke up. Hell, a lot of people woke up. And the sad part about that, the people who woke up are always painted as racist because they don't like the whole entire immigration thing for the fact that your government keeps stealing your money. So now we need this immigration thing. So I was basically explaining to them why immigration is so important to your country for the most part. Because at the end of the day, it's not the fact that you're racist. You're not racist. You're right in which how you feel. Unfortunately, your government's not seeing it the way you do. It's typically how that works. Your government's not seeing it the way you do at all. And that's sad because they keep taking your shit. And that's very sad, man. Like, why does your government need to keep on taking money from your account? Why does your government need to keep taking money from your account? Think about that. What is the purpose of it? Why do they need to do that? Yeah, no, they call anything pretty much that's not that racist for the most part. Hell, I would even be called racist or white. I've been called racist or white supremacist several times, and I'm not even white supremacist nor am I racist. But yeah, I've been called that many times. And the sad part about that is that's typically how they work to basically hush people. That's pretty much how they gotta. That's pretty much how they work to basically hush people up for the most part. But that's pretty much my red pill economics and my economic news basically on this channel, on these channels for the most part. Y'all have a good day. Be blessed. I'll catch y'all later for a live stream. If the live stream doesn't go off, if the Duzang's live stream doesn't go off, then I'll catch you for another podcast on women. So I can talk shit on women, basically. Y'all be blessed. Have a great day.